The rain came down in thin silver lines over Teterboro Airport, turning the private runway into a dark mirror beneath the gray New Jersey morning. And inside the Harrington Aviation Executive Terminal, every expensive surface seemed designed to remind ordinary people they did not belong there. The floor was polished white marble, with faint gray veins that reflected the amber ceiling lights. The waiting lounge smelled of fresh espresso, leather conditioner, rain-soaked wool coats, and distant jet fuel drifting in each time the glass doors opened. Black leather sofas sat in perfect angles around low walnut tables, where untouched copies of the Wall Street Journal and Forbes lay beside crystal bowls of mints no one ate. Outside the wall of reinforced glass, a Gulfstream G700 stood under the cold drizzle, its white fuselage gleaming under hangar lights, its tail marked with the dark blue Harrington Aerospace Logistics emblem. The jet was worth nearly $200 million, and that morning it was supposed to carry Victoria Harrington to Washington, D.C. for a $480 million defense logistics meeting that could make or break the next 5 years of her company. But the aircraft was dead on the ramp, grounded by a fault no one in her polished, certified, overpaid technical team had been able to clear. Victoria stood near the glass with her arms folded, tall and rigid in a navy-tailored suit, her dark brown hair pinned into a flawless low bun, her green eyes cold enough to silence assistants before they finished a sentence. Then the terminal doors opened, and in walked Jack Miller, rain on his worn brown work jacket, grease under his fingernails, a tired 9-year-old girl beside him, and an old rusted toolbox hanging from his right hand. The toolbox scraped faintly against his jeans as he stopped near the marble threshold, its metal corners dented, its latch scratched, a faded American flag sticker peeling from the side, and the hand-carved name Miller bolted crookedly to the front. Victoria looked at the toolbox first, then at Jack's boots, then at the little girl clutching a lunch bag against her chest, and her mouth tightened with open disgust. "You expect me to trust my $200 million jet to a man carrying junk from a garage sale?" she said, loud enough for pilots, executives, security guards, and mechanics to hear. The room went still. Jack's jaw moved once, but he said nothing. His daughter, Emily, looked up at him, her blue eyes wide with the kind of shame a child should never have to feel for a parent who worked hard. Jack only tightened his grip on the rusty handle, swallowed the hurt, and kept his shoulders square. And before this story continues, if you believe that honest work, fatherhood, and quiet strength still matter in America, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, because this is the kind of story that reminds us why dignity is worth defending. Victoria did not lower her voice after the insult, because she had built an empire by never apologizing in public. Her assistant, Lauren, stood 2 steps behind her holding a tablet with the Washington schedule glowing in red, while the chief pilot, Captain Daniel Reeves, waited near the glass doors with his cap tucked under one arm and worry carved into his face. The pilots had already refused to fly until the fault was resolved. The official maintenance crew had plugged in diagnostic equipment, twice rebooted the avionics, inspected the obvious relays, checked the flight control status pages, and still the jet remained locked in a no-go condition. Every passing minute was costing Victoria money, leverage, and reputation. On the far side of the lounge, 2 board members whispered near a coffee station, pretending not to stare at Jack's toolbox. One of them smirked when rainwater dripped from Jack's sleeve onto the marble. Emily saw it. She pressed the lunch bag harder to her chest, as though making herself smaller might protect her father from the room. Jack noticed, and that hurt him more than Victoria's words. He had been insulted by supervisors, ignored by corporate recruiters, underpaid by contractors, and dismissed by men who had never fixed anything with their own hands. But he had spent 9 years trying to teach his daughter that a Miller never answered cruelty with cruelty. "Ma'am," Jack said quietly, his voice rough from cold air and years of hangar work, "I don't need you to trust the toolbox. I need 7 minutes with the aircraft." A few people almost laughed. Victoria turned from the glass slowly, the way powerful people do when they want the room to watch someone shrink. 7 minutes? She repeated. "My certified team has been on that aircraft for almost an hour." Jack looked past her toward the jet, scanning the position of the service card, the open access panel, the wet ramp, The nervous way one mechanic kept glancing at the auxiliary power. Status display. "Yes, ma'am," he said. 7. Captain Reeves stepped forward before Victoria could cut him off. "Ms. Harrington, we're out of clean options. If he's seen something similar, let him look. We don't fly until maintenance signs off either way." Victoria's eyes flicked toward the jet, then toward the clock above the lounge entrance. Her meeting in Washington began in less than 90 minutes. Her reputation had been built on arriving early, leaving late, and never giving competitors. The pleasure of seeing her sweat. "Fine," she said, the words sharp and humiliating. "But if he scratches that aircraft, I'll buy the garage he came from and shut it down." Jack did not answer. He turned to Emily, crouched slightly, and softened his voice. "Stay inside where it's warm, kiddo." Emily looked at the people staring at them, then back at him. "Dad," she whispered, "you can fix it, right?" Jack forced a small smile, the kind fathers use when they are scared, but refuse to pass the fear. To their children. "I'll do my job," he said. "That's all a man can do." The automatic doors opened with a sigh, and the cold rain hit Jack's face as he stepped onto the ramp, carrying the old toolbox like it weighed more than metal. It carried his father's name, his Air Force years, the first socket set he had bought after basic training, the screwdriver he used in Dover when a transport aircraft had a similar intermittent fault, and a folded photo of his late wife Sarah taped inside the lid, where no one else could see it. The ramp smelled of wet concrete, aviation fuel, hydraulic fluid, and winter air. Water beaded on the sleeves of Jack's flannel shirt as he dropped to one knee beside the open service panel near the jet's underside. 2 Harrington mechanics hovered behind him, their expensive diagnostic tablets sealed in a waterproof case, their faces stiff with embarrassment and curiosity. Jack opened the toolbox. The hinges squealed. Inside, the tools were old, but organized with military discipline, wrenches lined by size, insulated pliers wrapped in worn black tape, a multimeter with a cracked corner, tiny labeled containers for spare connectors, and a flashlight whose casing had been polished smooth by years of use. From inside the terminal, Victoria watched through the glass with a look that was not quite doubt and not quite fear. Emily stood near the window too, but farther to the side, separated from Victoria by 20 feet of marble and a lifetime of money. Her sneakers were damp at the toes. Her brown coat was a little too small at the wrists. She watched her father kneel in the rain while adults in suits judged him from the warmth. Jack asked one mechanic to cycle the auxiliary power unit, then held up his hand when the system warning flickered. He listened, not to the words on a screen, but to the rhythm of the machine. The click delay, the short electrical hesitation, the faint stutter in the relay sequence. "There," he said under his breath. He removed a panel fastener, reached carefully into the access bay, and found what the glossy diagnostic system had not: a secondary control connector with moisture intrusion and green corrosion beginning around one pin, just enough to confuse the sensor feedback loop, not enough to trigger the obvious fault path. "You've got a dirty ghost," he said to the mechanic beside him. "Not a dead system, a lying signal." The mechanic frowned. "That connector passed inspection last month." Jack glanced up, rain dripping from his brow. Metal doesn't care what paperwork says. He cleaned the contact, stabilized the connector, replaced a compromised locking clip with one from his own kit, checked continuity twice, then motioned toward the cockpit. "Run it again." Inside the terminal, the warning tone stopped. The chief pilot looked down at the message on his tablet, blinked once, then looked through the glass at Victoria. "Fault cleared," he said. For a moment, no one moved. The terminal, which had been full of quiet contempt minutes earlier, became silent in a different way. The kind of silence that arrives when pride loses its voice. On the ramp, Jack stood slowly, his right knee wet from the concrete, his fingers blackened with fresh grime, his jacket darkened by rain. He did not celebrate. He did not look through the window for applause. He simply closed the old toolbox, snapped the rusty latch shut, and handed the compromised connector clip to the Harrington mechanic so the official record would be correct. Captain Reeves pushed through the door and went straight toward the aircraft with 2 crew members behind him. "We'll verify the repair and complete the sign-off," he called. "But she's alive." A murmur passed through the lounge. Lauren lowered the tablet slightly. One board member looked away. Emily's face changed first. Not into pride exactly, but into relief so deep it made her eyes shine. Her father had been mocked in front of strangers. And 7 minutes later, the jet that represented everything those strangers worshipped was breathing again because of his hands. Victoria remained near the glass, her reflection floating over the image of Jack on the wet ramp. For the first time that morning, she did not see the rusty toolbox as junk. She saw the faded flag sticker. She saw the careful arrangement of old tools. She saw a working man standing in the rain while people like her stayed warm and called it leadership. And somewhere behind the expensive suit, behind the billions, behind the reputation that made grown men fear disappointing her, a memory broke loose. Her father, Robert Harrington, kneeling beside an aircraft in Ohio when she was a girl, smiling with grease on his cheek, telling her, "A country stays strong because somebody honest keeps the engine running." The words hit her so hard she almost stepped back. Jack returned through the sliding doors with rain on his shoulders, and Emily rushed to him, but stopped just short, unsure if hugging him in that room would embarrass him more. Jack solved it by placing one hand gently on her head. "You okay?" he asked. Emily nodded, but her chin trembled. Victoria watched the girl fight tears for her father's dignity, and the victory she had needed so badly suddenly felt small. The jet was ready. Washington was waiting. The contract was still possible. But the woman who had mocked a father in front of his child now had to walk past both of them to board the aircraft. His rusty toolbox had brought back to life. Victoria boarded her jet without saying thank you, because for people who had learned to survive through control, gratitude felt dangerously close to surrender. The leather stairs were slick with rain, and a flight attendant held a black umbrella over her head, while Jack stood several yards away near the service cart, signing a maintenance note with a borrowed pen. She could feel him behind her without turning around, not because he demanded attention, but because his silence had weight. Inside the aircraft, the Gulfstream smelled of warm leather, polished wood veneer, expensive coffee, and the faint, sterile scent of a cabin cleaned by people who were trained never to leave fingerprints. Cream-colored seats faced each other beside glossy tables. Brass fixtures caught the soft cabin lights. A folded cashmere blanket lay across the sofa like an accessory in a magazine spread. Victoria placed her handbag on the seat beside her, sat down, and opened her briefing folder. But the words on the page blurred into one sentence she could not escape. "You expect me to trust my $200 million jet to a man carrying junk from a garage sale?" She had spoken those words as easily as signing a check. Now she could still see Emily's face through the terminal glass. The child's small mouth pressed tight, her eyes wet but stubborn, trying not to cry in a room full of adults who had treated her father like an embarrassment. Captain Reeves entered the cabin a moment later and stood near the doorway. "We're cleared to depart, Ms. Harrington," he said. "The temporary repair is safe for flight, but I'm logging a full replacement on arrival." Victoria nodded without looking up. "And the man?" she asked. Reeves paused. "Mr. Miller?" "Yes." The captain's expression hardened just a little, not enough to be disrespectful, but enough for Victoria to notice. He knew what he was doing. I flew C-17 support before corporate aviation. Men like him kept aircraft moving when the rest of us just complained about the weather. Victoria looked out the window. Jack was now crouched in front of Emily, wiping rain from her cheek with his thumb. He gave her his jacket even though his own shirt was soaked. That gesture, simple and automatic, pierced Victoria more sharply than any insult thrown back at her could have done. She had crossed the world in private aircraft, negotiated with senators, intimidated billionaires, and built warehouses across America. But she could not remember the last time anyone had taken off their coat because she was cold. Jack Miller had not planned to bring Emily to Teterboro that morning. He had planned to drop her at Mrs. Alvarez's apartment before sunrise, then take the early maintenance call on a charter aircraft, finish by noon, and maybe pick up an extra inspection shift if the hangar manager needed hands. But Mrs. Alvarez's grandson had woken with a fever. The elementary school had a delayed opening because of icy roads, and Jack had no backup. 3 years after Sarah died, most of his life still moved like that. One emergency balanced on top of another. One unpaid bill held back by one temporary job. One father trying to look calm while doing math in his head. He did not want his daughter to understand. He had once worn a clean Air Force uniform and moved with the steady confidence of a man whose work mattered to his country. At Dover Air Force Base, he had been known as the mechanic who could hear a
failing bearing from across the hangar and tell a young airman, "Don't rush the fix. Rushing breaks planes and people." He had served 12 years in aviation maintenance, including 2 overseas support rotations, and came home with a service record no one in a corporate lobby ever asked to see. After Sarah's diagnosis, he left full-time military life to be beside her through chemotherapy appointments, hospital nights, insurance fights, and the quiet terror of watching a woman who once filled a
kitchen with laughter become too tired to lift a glass of water. The medical bills drained their savings. The funeral took what was left. The world sent sympathy cards, then moved on. Jack did not. He learned how to braid Emily's hair badly, how to pack lunches with apple slices cut the way Sarah used to cut them, how to sit outside the bathroom door when his daughter cried because Mother's Day projects at school felt like punishment. He kept the old toolbox because it had belonged to his father. Before him, a Korean War-era mechanic's son who believed a family name was something you polished through conduct, not money. That morning, when Victoria mocked it, Jack had felt the insult land on 3 generations of millermen, but he swallowed it because Emily was watching, and he refused to teach her that pride mattered more than character. Victoria's flight to Washington lasted only 41 minutes, but it felt longer than some transatlantic crossings. Her team rehearsed numbers around her, fuel cost reductions, logistics automation, defense readiness, veteran hiring statistics she had approved for the presentation because they sounded good on slides. Lauren read from the tablet in a careful voice. The Veteran Workforce Initiative is mentioned on page 12. It says Harrington Aerospace remains committed to honoring American service through opportunity. Victoria's eyes lifted slowly. How many veterans do we actually employ in technical leadership? Lauren hesitated. Across senior technical leadership? Yes. The cabin engines hummed beneath the silence. Lauren tapped the screen, buying seconds. Directly, 6. Most are consultants. The program is still in development. Victoria looked back out the oval window as the rainy sprawl of New Jersey dropped away beneath the clouds. 6. Her company used flag imagery in investor videos, sponsored Armed Forces Day luncheons, donated to carefully photographed non-profit events, and sold itself as an American company, built on service and discipline. Yet when a veteran mechanic had walked into her terminal with old tools and a daughter in a too small coat, she had seen poverty before competence. Her father's voice came back again, unwanted and clear. Robert Harrington had not been born rich. He grew up outside Dayton, Ohio, in a 2-bedroom house with peeling paint, a mother who stretched meatloaf across 3 dinners, and a father who came home from factory shifts smelling of oil. He joined the Air Force at 19, became a pilot, later built the small cargo company that Victoria turned into a national giant. He was strict, patriotic, conservative in the old sense of the word. Protect your family, keep your word, stand for the flag, shake the hand of the person who fixes what you cannot, and never confuse price with worth. Victoria had loved him fiercely as a child and resented him brutally as an adult. She thought his loyalty to ordinary workers made him sentimental. He thought her ambition, unchecked by humility, would make her lonely. They stopped speaking for months at a time. He died after a stroke while she was in Singapore closing a deal. She arrived too late to hear his final words. Since then, she had treated regret like an enemy she could defeat by working more. But now regret sat across from her in the cabin, wearing Jack Miller's rain-soaked jacket and Emily's trembling eyes. Back at Teterboro, Jack refused the first payment offer because it came attached to an insult. Dressed as procedure. A Harrington legal associate, young, smooth-faced, and visibly uncomfortable, handed him a clipboard in the maintenance office and said, "Standard confidentiality acknowledgement, Mr. Miller. There's also a one-time emergency service fee of $800. Jack looked at the paper, then at the office around him. The room had gray metal cabinets, a humming vending machine, a faded safety poster curling at one corner, and a space heater fighting the cold near the door. Emily sat in a plastic chair with her lunch bag on her knees, pretending to read a library book while listening to every word. 800, Jack asked. The associate cleared his throat. That is the approved rate for non-contracted emergency assistance. I just cleared a grounded G700 for a CEO on a defense deadline. I understand, but there are internal brackets. Jack gave a tired half smile with no humor in it. Internal brackets don't pay rent. The associate's cheeks reddened. I'm just following instructions. Jack knew he was. That was the problem. Most cruelty came from people following instructions written by people who never had to look the wounded in the eye. He could have shouted. He wanted to. The landlord had given him until Friday. Emily needed new winter boots. The hospital payment plan had called twice that week. But he saw his daughter's fingers tighten around the book, and he chose restraint again. Keep the paper, Jack said. Have maintenance call me if They want the connector specs. The associate blinked. You're declining payment? Jack lifted the toolbox. No, I'm declining to be bought cheap and silenced. Emily stood when he did. In the hallway, she slipped her hand into his. Dad, we need the money, she whispered, guilt already forming in a child who had learned too much about bills. Jack stopped beside a window overlooking the wet hangar and lowered himself to her eye level. Listen to me, Em. We need money, yes, but we need our name. More, she swallowed. Was that lady mad because we're poor? Jack looked toward the runway where Victoria's jet had disappeared into the clouds. No, he said softly. She was mad because she forgot poor people can still be excellent. The meeting in Washington was held inside a private conference suite near Arlington, with a view of the Potomac hidden behind sheets of rain and security glass. The room had a long mahogany table, framed photographs of aircraft carriers and cargo planes on the E. Walls, small American flags placed beside water glasses, and men and women in dark suits who spoke in polished phrases about national resilience. Victoria entered exactly 4 minutes before the scheduled start, which for her felt like arriving late to her own execution. Everyone stood. They always stood for her. She shook hands, smiled with perfect restraint, and took her place at the head of the table. Across from her sat Grant Whitmore, a retired general turned chairman of Sentinel Defense Systems, a silver-haired man with a square jaw and the calm intensity of someone who had spent decades measuring people under pressure. He had known her father. That fact already made Victoria uncomfortable. The presentation began smoothly. Lauren advanced slides. Numbers appeared. Fuel efficiency, rapid deployment, domestic logistics networks, American jobs, veteran workforce values. Victoria delivered the first section with controlled authority, but each time she said the words service, honor, or working families, she felt something tighten in her throat. On slide 12, a stock photo appeared of a smiling mechanic in clean coveralls holding a wrench beside a flag. The caption read, "Built by Americans who serve." Victoria stopped speaking. For 3 seconds, no one understood why. Then Grant Whitmore leaned back slightly and studied her. "Victoria," he said. She looked at the image, and it felt obscene. Not because the message was wrong, but because she had used that message while despising the real version of it that had stood before her in wet boots. She could still move forward, sign the contract, send Jack a better check, put the discomfort into a sealed drawer inside herself, like she had done with her father's final voicemail. But Emily's face came back again, and this time Victoria saw not just a poor child embarrassed for her father. She saw a daughter learning from adults whether honest men deserved respect. Victoria closed the presentation folder. "Before we continue," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "there is something I need to correct." Jack and Emily drove home in a 15-year-old Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard, a heater that clicked before it worked, and a little American flag clipped to the vent because Emily had bought it for him at a school fundraiser. The toolbox sat between them on the bench seat, too heavy for the floorboard cluttered with receipts, work gloves, and an old children's umbrella with yellow ducks on. Rain tapped the windshield while the wipers squeaked across the glass. Emily stared out at the strip malls and gas stations sliding past, then said, "Mom would have yelled at that lady." Jack almost laughed, but it caught in his chest. "Your mom had a special gift for yelling politely." Emily smiled for half a second. Sarah had been a school nurse with red hair, a quick temper, and a habit of bringing home grocery store flowers even when they could not afford them because, as she said, a home needs color when life gets ugly. Jack still bought carnations on the anniversary of her death, sometimes from the reduced price bucket, and placed them in the chipped blue vase by the kitchen sink. Their apartment in Hackensack was small but clean, with second-hand furniture. A kitchen table Jack had sanded himself, and framed photos arranged like proof that joy had existed there once. There was Sarah at the beach in Cape May, laughing into the wind. Sarah holding newborn Emily in a hospital blanket. Jack in uniform, younger and broader, standing beside a cargo aircraft. On the refrigerator, Emily's spelling test with a red 96 sat under a magnet from the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, a place Jack had promised to take her when money stopped being a battlefield. When they got home, the hallway smelled of old carpet and someone's fried onions. An envelope was taped to their door. Jack saw it before Emily did. His stomach sank. It was from the landlord. Final notice. Emily read. Enough of the bold letters to understand. Dad? Jack peeled it off carefully, as if gentleness could make the words less violent. We're okay, he said, but his voice did not sound like the voice he used when things were truly okay. It sounded like a man trying to hold a roof up with both hands while his child slept beneath it. In the Arlington conference room, Victoria did something no one in her company had ever seen her do. She admitted fault before anyone forced her to. She did not tell the whole story yet. She began with the facts. Her aircraft had been grounded. Her team had failed to identify the immediate cause. A freelance mechanic named Jack Miller had solved the issue in 7 minutes using practical experience from military aviation maintenance. The room listened politely at first, assuming this was a leadership anecdote designed to flatter frontline workers before returning to profit projections. Then Victoria's voice shifted. When Mr. Miller arrived, she said, looking at the small American flag beside her water glass, I judged him by his clothes, by his old toolbox, and by what I assumed poverty meant. I mocked him in front of my team and in front of his daughter. Lauren froze beside the screen. A board member coughed. Grant Whitmore's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. Victoria continued before courage left her. That man saved my aircraft, my schedule, and this meeting. More importantly, he exposed something rotten in my leadership. The word rotten seemed to disturb the polished air. My father used to say that America is held together by people who do the work when no one important is watching. This morning, I forgot that. I forgot him. No one spoke. She expected Grant to use the moment against her, to question her judgment or delay the contract. Instead, he leaned forward and folded his hands on the table. Robert Harrington once delayed a delivery 48 hours because a junior mechanic told him something felt wrong. With an engine, he said. Cost him a fortune, saved 6 lives when they found the crack. Victoria's eyes burned, but she kept her face still. Grant looked toward the slide with the smiling stock mechanic. Your father respected the man with the wrench. Victoria nodded once. I know. Do you? He asked gently. It landed harder than an accusation. For the first time in years, Victoria had no immediate defense. She looked at Lauren. Find Mr. Miller. Not later. Now. Lauren called Teterboro. First, then the maintenance office, then the hangar manager, then the small contractor who had sent Jack that morning. By the time she reached him, Jack was sitting at his kitchen table with the final notice beside a stack of bills and Emily doing homework across from him. The apartment smelled of canned tomato soup, toasted bread, and the faint lavender detergent Sarah used to buy in bulk. Jack answered because unknown numbers sometimes meant work. Miller, he said. Lauren's voice was cautious. Mr. Miller, this is Lauren Price from Harrington Aerospace. Ms. Harrington would like to speak with you. Jack looked at the phone, then at Emily, who looked back over the top of her pencil. About what? He asked. She's in a meeting in Washington and would like to include you by video call. Jack's face hardened. No, thank you. Lauren seemed genuinely startled. Mr. Miller, this is important. It was important when your people tried to hand me hush money. Emily's pencil stopped, moving. Lauren took a breath. I'm sorry for how that was handled. Are you sorry or is your boss sorry? Silence. Jack rubbed his forehead. He was tired, wet, hungry, and one envelope away from a disaster he did not know how to explain to his daughter. Look, he said, softer but still firm. I'm not interested in being used for a corporate apology photo. Emily watched him closely. Jack turned slightly away, not because he had anything to hide, but because children hear despair even when fathers lower their voices. Lauren said, Ms. Harrington asked for you by name. She also asked if your daughter was with you because she owes both of you an apology. That changed the room. Emily's expression shifted from suspicion to fragile curiosity. Jack closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to protect her from that woman forever. Another part knew Emily had seen the humiliation and deserved to see whether adults could repair damage honestly. No cameras for publicity, Jack said. No press. Release, Lauren answered quickly. Agreed. And my daughter doesn't get spoken down to. Agreed. Jack looked at Emily. Your call, kiddo. Emily hesitated. Then she whispered, maybe she needs to learn. Jack let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a wound reopening. Yeah, he said. Maybe she does. The video connection appeared on the conference room screen 6 minutes later, and the polished faces around the Arlington table were replaced by the small, worn kitchen of a father and daughter who had nothing staged for corporate comfort. Behind Jack, a refrigerator held school papers, a grocery list, and a photo of a red-haired woman kissing a baby's forehead. A chipped blue vase with 3 carnations sat near the sink. Emily sat beside him in her brown coat because the apartment heat had not fully kicked in, her hair slightly messy from the rain, her shoulders pulled inward, but her eyes steady. Jack had changed out of his soaked jacket into a plain gray sweatshirt. His hands still showed traces of grease around the nails no amount of quick washing could remove. Victoria stood at the head of the conference table, no longer hidden behind slides. Seeing them there, in that modest kitchen, did something to the room that numbers never could. The contrast was almost unbearable. Mahogany and marble on one side, laminate counters and overdue bills on the other. A defense contract worth hundreds of millions on one side. A child's spelling test and soup bowls on the other. Mr. Miller, Victoria began, then stopped because the formal address suddenly felt like another wall. Jack, he did not smile. Ms. Harrington, she accepted the distance. I asked you to join because I owe you an apology. Not a payment disguised as an apology. Not a statement written by legal. A real one. Emily looked at her father, then back at the screen. Victoria continued. I humiliated you because I saw an old toolbox and assumed it meant you were beneath me. I did that in front of your daughter. That was wrong. Jack's face remained guarded, but his eyes moved once toward Emily. Victoria's voice tightened. My father would have been ashamed of me, and I am ashamed of myself. The room stayed silent. Emily leaned forward slightly. Why did you say it? She asked. Jack put a hand on the table, ready to stop her if needed, but Victoria answered. Because I was scared and proud, and sometimes proud people try to make someone else feel small, so they don't have to admit they're scared. Emily absorbed that with the seriousness of a child who has known adult fear too early. My dad fixes things, she said. He's not junk. Victoria's eyes filled, but she did not look away. No, she said, he is not. That call did not heal everything, but it opened the first honest doorway Victoria had walked through in years. After the meeting resumed, she could no longer present Harrington Aerospace as if the morning had not happened. Grant Whitmore asked practical questions. What percentage of technical contracts went to independent mechanics? How many veterans were screened out by automated hiring systems? How often frontline experience was ignored because it lacked elite credentials? Victoria answered what she knew and admitted what she did not. Each admission felt like stepping onto ice, but the ice did not break. Instead, the room became more serious, more grounded, less theatrical. Grant did not cancel the deal. He delayed the final signature by 72 hours and gave Victoria a condition. Return with a concrete workforce reform plan, not charity language, not a scholarship photo, not a hollow slogan. If you want to sell readiness, he told her, prove you know where readiness comes from. On the flight back to Teterboro that evening, the cabin felt different. The same leather seats, the same polished fixtures, the same expensive silence. But Victoria was no longer comfortable inside it. She opened her father's old voicemail archive on her phone for the first time in months. There were 11 saved messages. She played the last one. Robert Harrington's voice emerged thin and raspy from a hospital room she had not reached in time. "Vic, it's Dad. I know you're busy. I just wanted to hear your voice. Don't let the company make you forget the people. The people are the company. And don't spend your whole life winning rooms you go home from alone." Victoria pressed the phone against her lips as if she could hold the voice there. She had heard the message before, but she had never listened to it. Beneath the hum of the jet Jack had brought back to life, she finally understood that her father had not been criticizing her ambition. He had been trying to save the part of her that still knew how to love. The next morning, Victoria went to the Harrington headquarters in Midtown Manhattan earlier than usual. But for once, she did not go straight to the executive elevator. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate power. 40-foot ceilings, black stone walls, a suspended sculpture of brushed steel aircraft wings, security turnstiles, and a giant digital American flag that waved silently above the reception desk during company events. Employees moved through it with badges, coffee cups, and the cautious pace of people who knew the CEO's mood could change a department's future. Victoria stopped near the wall displaying the company's history. There were photos of cargo planes, defense warehouses, ribbon cuttings, senators, shaking hands, and her own face beside magazine covers calling her the Iron Lady of American Logistics. At the far end, almost hidden behind a decorative plant, was an older black and white photograph of Robert Harrington in a mechanic's coverall before he became a pilot, crouched beside an aircraft wheel with a toolbox at his feet. Victoria had passed that wall thousands of times without looking closely. Now she noticed the toolbox. It was scratched, dented, ordinary, not so different from Jack's. She ordered the executive leadership team into the boardroom by 7:30 a.m. The table was glass, the chairs Italian leather, the skyline of Manhattan sharp beyond the windows. Her CFO objected first when she described the reform plan. A $25 million initial investment, veteran and independent mechanic recruitment, paid apprenticeships for working parents, credential review by experienced technicians rather than algorithms, emergency hardship support, and a training center, connected to real aircraft maintenance, not public relations. "Victoria," he said carefully, "this sounds expensive and emotionally reactive." She looked at him across the table. "So was grounding a $200 million aircraft because we undervalued practical expertise." Another executive tried a softer angle. "We can create a smaller pilot program and announce it on Veterans Day." Victoria's jaw tightened. "This is not a holiday commercial. This is an operational correction." The room understood then that something had shifted. Not softened exactly, refined. Her sharpness had found a new target, the systems that rewarded polish over competence. Jack wanted nothing to do with Harrington Aerospace after the apology, and that made Victoria trust him more. When Lauren called to request an in-person meeting, he said no twice. When the hangar manager told him the CEO herself wanted to discuss a technical role, Jack said, "Tell her I'm not a mascot." When an email arrived with a formal invitation and a prepaid car service, he ignored it until Emily stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, doing a fair imitation of her mother's stubborn face. "Dad, you always tell me not to decide from fear." Jack looked up from repairing the loose leg on their kitchen chair. "This isn't fear. It's pattern recognition. That sounds like fear wearing work boots." He stared at her, then laughed despite himself. She smiled, pleased to have landed the line. But beneath the humor, she was afraid too. The final notice had not disappeared. The refrigerator was nearly empty. Jack had sold his service pistol display case and Sarah's old sewing machine to cover bills he never mentioned. Pride kept his back straight, but pride could not buy groceries. 2 days later, he agreed to meet Victoria at a diner near Teterboro, not at her headquarters. "Neutral ground," he told Lauren. The place was called Liberty Diner, with red vinyl booths, chrome edges, a flag by the register, and the smell of bacon, coffee, pancakes, and fryer oil hanging in the air. Victoria arrived in a black SUV, wearing a charcoal coat over another tailored suit. and looked profoundly out of place between truck drivers, TSA workers, and a retired Marine reading the sports page. Jack and Emily were already in a booth. Emily had ordered hot chocolate because Jack said yes before checking the price. Victoria noticed. She noticed everything now. She slid into the opposite seat without an entourage. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the waitress appeared and called Jack Hun, poured coffee into his chipped mug, and asked Emily how school was. Victoria watched this small economy of familiarity and realized Jack had more belonging in a $10 diner than she had in most rooms named after donors. "I'm not here to buy your forgiveness," Victoria said finally. Jack stirred his coffee. "Good. It's not for sale." Emily looked between them, waiting to see if the grown-ups would ruin the pancakes. Victoria nodded. "I'm here to offer you work you earned before I was smart enough to recognize it." The offer was not charity, and Jack made sure of that before he even touched the folder. Victoria proposed a senior technical inspection role focused on field diagnostics, maintenance training, and real-world failure review across Harrington's aircraft network, with a salary of $185,000, health insurance, relocation support if needed, and flexible scheduling around Emily's school. Jack read every line slowly. His hands were steady, but Emily could see the muscle in his cheek move. The number was more than money. It was rent paid on time. It was dental appointments not postponed. It was winter boots bought before the snow. It was medicine without choosing which bill could wait. It was a father sleeping through the night without listening for disaster in every creak of the apartment. But Jack had been hurt enough to know that rescue sometimes came with invisible chains. "Why me?" he asked. Victoria did not reach for the easy answer. "Because you identified a fault my system missed. Because your record supports your skill. Because men and women like you are exactly who my company claims to value and has quietly ignored." Jack tapped the folder once. "And because you feel guilty." Victoria held his gaze. "Yes, that opened my eyes. It doesn't make the offer false." Emily looked at her father. "Dad," she whispered, barely audible. "Mom would say, let people fix what they broke." Jack's throat tightened so quickly he had to look down. Sarah had said versions of that all the time, usually after neighbors argued or family members disappointed them. "Let people repair, Jack. If we never let anyone repair, we're just keeping score in a burning house." Victoria heard the pain in the silence that followed, though she did not know the memory behind it. Jack closed the folder. "I'll consider it," he said. "And if I say yes, I report what I find honestly. No smoothing things over because a vice president wants clean numbers." Victoria almost smiled. "If you smooth things over, I'll fire you." Jack looked at her for a long second, then gave the smallest nod. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the first plank of a bridge. Over the next week, the story did not explode on the internet, because Jack refused publicity and Victoria honored that refusal. But inside Harrington Aerospace, rumors moved faster than official memos. Employees heard that the CEO had apologized to a mechanic on a defense call. They heard she had delayed a major contract to rebuild a workforce plan. They heard a single father from Hackensack had done what the company's elite systems could not. Some admired it, others resented it. The loudest resistance came from inside the executive layer, where polished people felt threatened by a man whose authority came from competence rather than title. Martin Kessler, the vice president of fleet operations, cornered Lauren outside the conference room and said, "We are not restructuring National Maintenance Review around a guy with a tackle box." Lauren, who had watched Emily tell the CEO her father was not junk, replied, "It was a toolbox, Martin, and it saved your quarter." Jack felt the resistance as soon as he accepted a temporary consulting assignment. Men who had ignored him at the terminal now over-explained procedures he had helped write in military form years before. One manager called him Buddy, in a tone that made the word smaller than his name. Another asked whether he was comfortable using modern diagnostic platforms, and Jack answered by finding 3 misclassified fault reports in the man's own dashboard before lunch. He did not embarrass people for sport. That was not his way, but he refused to shrink. Emily noticed the change at home first. Her father still came back tired, still packed her lunch, still checked the locks twice before bed, but his shoulders no longer looked like he was bracing for the next blow. One night, She found him at the kitchen table, not staring at bills, but reading training manuals and making notes in the margins with the old mechanical pencil Sarah used for grocery lists. "Are we safe now?" Emily asked from the hallway. Jack looked up. The question broke him more than he showed. "We're getting there," he said. She came to sit beside him. "Do you hate Ms. Harrington?" Jack thought about it. "No." "Why?" He tapped the pencil against the page. "Because hating someone keeps them in charge. Of your heart. I've got better things to protect." Emily leaned against his arm, and he kissed the top of her head. For the first time in months, the apartment felt less like a place holding back collapse, and more like a home preparing for morning. Victoria's transformation was slower, rougher, and less graceful than the public version would have made it seem. She still snapped at people when frightened. She still measured time in losses and leverage. She still found herself wanting to hide, behind coldness when conversations turned personal. But now, when she failed, she noticed. That alone was new. She began visiting maintenance floors without cameras. At first, workers stiffened when she appeared, assuming layoffs, inspections, or some executive performance of humility. She asked questions and learned to wait for answers. She stood beside a machinist in Ohio who explained why a cheaper part would cost more in failures. She listened to a widowed mother in Texas who had left aviation maintenance because childcare made shift work impossible. She read exit interviews her HR team had summarized into harmless phrases and discovered whole lives buried beneath them. Veterans rejected for lacking bachelor's degrees, fathers penalized for school pickup, older mechanics pushed aside by software systems that could detect keywords but not judgment. Each story stripped away another layer of the lie she had told herself, that success meant she had earned the right not to see people. One Friday evening, she drove alone to the storage facility where her father's belongings had sat boxed for 4 years. The unit smelled of cardboard, dust, cedar, and old motor oil. In the back, beneath a tarp, she found Robert Harrington's workbench from Ohio, the surface scarred by decades of repairs. A photograph was tucked into the drawer. Victoria at 11 years old, wearing safety goggles too big for her face, holding a wrench while her father laughed beside her. On the back, in his blocky handwriting, he had written, "Vic learning that tools are only as good as the hands and heart behind them." She sat on the concrete floor in her expensive coat and cried without elegance, without witnesses, without trying to turn grief into productivity. When the tears passed, she called Jack. He answered on the third ring, guarded as always. "Miller." Victoria wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "Did your father teach you tools?" she asked. There was a pause. "Yes, mine did. Too," she said. Jack heard something in her voice that was not CEO, not billionaire, not apology strategy. It was a daughter. So he answered gently, "Then maybe neither of us is done learning from them." The decisive test came 72 hours later in Hangar 4 at Teterboro, where the same Gulf Stream that had nearly destroyed Victoria's morning now sat beneath bright maintenance lights, surrounded by executives, technicians, pilots, union representatives, and 3 visitors from Sentinel. Defense Systems. The hangar had none of the soft luxury of the private terminal. Its concrete floor was stained by years of oil and tire marks, its steel beams climbed into shadow, and the air smelled of metal, cold rain, hydraulic fluid, burnt coffee, and the clean chemical bite of aviation solvent. A massive American flag hung from the rear wall, its lower edge moving slightly each time the hangar doors breathed in the winter wind. Victoria had ordered the meeting there deliberately. Not in Manhattan, not in a hotel ballroom, not in a polished room where slogans could hide from reality. Jack stood near a rolling workbench with his old toolbox at his feet, wearing clean, dark work pants, a navy Harrington field jacket without executive decoration, and the cautious expression of a man still not sure whether the floor beneath him would hold. Emily stood beside him in a modest blue dress under her brown coat, her hair brushed carefully, her hands folded in front of her the way Sarah had taught her for school ceremonies. She had asked to come because, in her words, "I saw the bad part, so I want to see the right part too." Victoria heard that sentence twice in her head before the meeting began. Across the hangar, Martin Kessler whispered to another vice president, his mouth twisted with irritation. "This is theater. he said not quietly enough. A billionaire guilt trip starring a handyman. Jack heard it. Emily heard it. Victoria saw both of them hear it, and something inside her went very still. Victoria stepped onto a low-maintenance platform instead of a stage, holding no prepared speech and no tablet. Behind her, the aircraft's service panel remained open, exposing the repaired area Jack had identified, because she wanted every person in the hangar to understand that the truth was not abstract. It had wires, connectors, corrosion, judgment, timing, and hands. 3 days ago, she began, her voice carrying cleanly through the hangar. This aircraft was grounded. By a failure, our systems did not catch fast enough. No one moved. A man walked in with a toolbox I mocked before I knew his record, his skill, his service, or his name. I looked at rust and saw worthlessness. I looked at work clothes and saw failure. I looked at a father standing beside his daughter and forgot the values this company claims to defend. Martin shifted his weight, uncomfortable now that the room was no longer protecting him. Victoria turned slightly toward Jack. Jack Miller served this country in Air Force aviation maintenance for 12 years. He left full-time service to care for his wife during cancer treatment, and then raised his daughter alone after losing her. He did not ask this company for pity. He asked for 7 minutes. The words settled over the hangar like a verdict. Emily stared at Victoria, her face tense, as if she still did not fully trust kindness that came from powerful people. Victoria looked at her directly. "Emily, I owe you something too. A child should never have to watch adults measure her father by his boots, his paycheck, or the age of his tools. I did that. Others did that. And I am sorry." Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. Jack's jaw tightened, not with anger this time, but with the effort of remaining composed while someone finally named the wound, instead of stepping around it. Then Martin Kessler made the mistake that forced Victoria's transformation to become more than words. He stepped forward from the line of executives, his face red with the anger of a man losing control of a hierarchy that had always favored him. "Victoria, with respect, this is emotional overcorrection," he said. "We have certified engineers, compliance teams, and established leadership channels. You cannot hand operational influence to a freelance mechanic because he got lucky once." The hangar went cold. Jack lowered his eyes for half a second, not because he agreed, but because old humiliation knows how to reopen a door. Quickly. Emily moved closer to her father. Victoria came down from the platform and walked toward Martin, each step echoing against the concrete. "Got lucky?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, which made it more dangerous. Martin lifted his chin. "Yes. Lucky. And now we're building policy around sentiment." Victoria turned to the senior maintenance auditor. "Show the report." The auditor connected a tablet to the hangar screen, and pages of inspection history appeared. 3 previous intermittent warnings misclassified as non-critical. 2 internal notes dismissed because they came from lower-level technicians. 1 automated hiring rejection from 8 months earlier with Jack Miller's name on it, because he lacked a corporate management degree despite military technical credentials. The evidence was not dramatic. It was worse. It was ordinary. A system had ignored competence because competence arrived without polish. Victoria faced the room. "Mr. Miller was not lucky. We were careless. And our carelessness wore a suit." Martin's face drained of color. Grant Whitmore, standing near the wing with his arms folded, looked at Jack and gave one slow nod of respect. Jack did not smile. He looked at the screen where his own rejected application sat beside the repaired aircraft, and the full cruelty of the circle became visible. The same company that had dismissed him on paper had needed him in the rain. Victoria walked to the rolling workbench, lifted Jack's old toolbox with both hands, and carried it to the center of the hangar. She did not pretend it was light. The metal was heavy, cold, dented, and real. She set it on the platform where her speech should have been, and turned the crooked Miller nameplate toward the room. "My father started with a box like this," she said. "I buried that truth because I wanted the world to believe Harrington Aerospace was born polished. It wasn't. It was born from men and women who came home tired, kept their families together, stood when the flag was raised, fixed what others could not, and believed a handshake still meant something." Her voice broke on the last sentence, and for once she did not hide it. She looked at Jack. "I can offer you a title, salary, and authority, but none of that repairs what my words did to your daughter. So I am asking plainly, in front of everyone I should have corrected sooner. Will you help me rebuild this company the right way? Not as a symbol, not as charity, but as a leader?" Jack stared at the toolbox, then at Emily. The girl's eyes were wet, but she nodded once, small and fierce. Jack stepped forward. "I'll help," he said, his voice low. "But not because you're rich enough to offer it." Victoria nodded. "Then why?" Jack looked around the hangar at the mechanics, pilots, executives, and the flag moving gently behind them. "Because my daughter needs to know that when people break trust, honest repair is still possible. And because this country doesn't get stronger by laughing at the hands that keep it flying." Victoria pressed her lips together as tears finally escaped. "Then teach me," she said. Jack held her gaze. "I will. But you'll have to listen when the person talking doesn't look important." Victoria answered without hesitation. "I should have started years ago. If this story of a humble single dad proving everyone wrong has you watching until the end, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more emotional stories of sacrifice, hidden strength, and unforgettable twists. Now let's get back to the video. What happened next was not applause at first. It was something deeper and slower. A room full of people realizing they had been invited to witness a company's conscience turning around in public. The first person to clap was not an executive or investor, but Captain Reeves, standing beside the nose of the Gulfstream in his pilot uniform. Then one of the older mechanics joined, then a young technician near the tool carts, then the retired general, then the whole hangar, until the sound rose beneath the American flag and echoed against steel beams like weather changing. Emily stepped into her father's side, and Jack wrapped one arm around her shoulders, pulling her close without shame this time. Victoria watched them and understood that the greatest contract in the room was not the one with Sentinel defense systems. It was the silent contract between a parent and child. "I will protect your belief in goodness as long as I can." Grant Whitmore walked toward Victoria with the revised workforce proposal in his hand. 72 hours ago, he said, "I asked you to prove you knew where readiness comes from." He glanced at Jack's toolbox on the platform. "Now you do." Victoria looked at the document, then at Jack. "We sign only if this plan is binding," she said. Grant smiled faintly. "That was going to be my condition." Martin Kessler left the hangar before the applause ended, not fired entire spectacle, but finished by the truth. Victoria did not chase him. Her attention was on Emily, who had stepped away from her father and approached the old toolbox. The girl touched the faded flag sticker with 2 fingers and whispered, "Mom would have liked this." Jack heard her and closed his eyes. Victoria heard her too, and the words became a promise she could not put into a contract, but intended to spend the rest of her life honoring. The resolution did not arrive as a miracle with music. Swelling in every wound instantly healed. It arrived through paperwork, policy, hard conversations, and the kind of consistent conduct that proves an apology was real. Within 30 days, Harrington Aerospace Logistics announced the Harrington Miller Veterans Aviation Training Center with an initial investment of $25 million, but Victoria refused to let marketing turn Jack's pain into a glossy campaign. The first internal memo did not feature his daughter's face, did not mention poverty like a selling point, and did not call Victoria generous. It named the problem plainly. Experienced veterans, independent mechanics, working parents, and practical technicians had been overlooked by systems that confused credentials with character. Jack accepted the role of Director of Practical Safety Inspection on 3 conditions. Every field technician could challenge a report without fear of retaliation. Every veteran applicant would be reviewed by a human with maintenance experience, and no executive could override a safety concern to protect a schedule. Victoria signed all 3 before legal finished objecting. Jack's first office was not in Manhattan because he refused a glass room above people whose work happened on concrete floors. He chose a small office off the hangar with a dented metal desk, 2 filing cabinets, a coffee maker that hissed too loudly, and a window facing the aircraft bays. On his first official morning, Emily placed a framed photo of Sarah beside his computer. then set the old toolbox under the desk. "So it remembers where we came from," she said. Jack looked at the picture of his wife, then at his daughter, and for a moment, the man who had held himself together through cancer wards, funeral bills, rejection letters, and public humiliation had to turn toward the window until he could breathe again. Victoria's life changed in ways that impressed no magazine at first, because the most important repairs were private. She began, leaving the office before midnight twice a week, then 3 times. She flew to Ohio and reopened her father's old workshop, not as a museum to wealth, but as a training space for young mechanics from working families, veterans returning to civilian life, and single parents who needed flexible schedules instead of lectures about ambition. The workshop smelled of sawdust, motor oil, old brick, black coffee, and rain when storms rolled across the fields, and Victoria kept Robert Harrington's scarred workbench exactly where it had always been. Above it, she hung a small plaque with one of his sayings, "Respect the person who keeps the engine running." Jack helped design the curriculum with blunt honesty, cutting anything that sounded impressive but did not help people fix real machines. Emily visited on school breaks and became known among the trainees as the girl who checked whether everyone had eaten, because she remembered too well what it felt like to watch adults discuss millions while her father worried about rent. Victoria paid off none of Jack's life as a dramatic gift, because he would not allow it. Instead, she paid him fairly, insured him properly, respected his time, and quietly created an emergency family fund for employees who were one hospital bill or eviction notice away from collapse. When Jack found out, he did not accuse her of pity. He simply read the policy, nodded once, and said, "That'll keep some good people from breaking." Victoria answered, "That's the point. It was not friendship yet in the simple sense, and it was not family by blood, but it became something steady. Trust built through kept promises, one honest decision at a time." 6 months later, Sentinel Defense Systems finalized the full contract with Harrington Aerospace, but the signing ceremony looked nothing like the one Victoria's old team would have arranged. There were no champagne towers, no velvet ropes, no executives congratulating one another under flattering lights. The ceremony took place in the Teterboro hangar, with mechanics, pilots, dispatchers, veterans, single parents, apprentices, and their families standing together beneath the American flag. Captain Reeves stood near the aircraft he once refused to fly until it was safe. Grant Whitmore signed on behalf of Sentinel, then handed the pen not to Victoria, but to Jack, asking him to sign as the technical witness for the safety reforms attached to the agreement. Jack hesitated, overwhelmed by the simple dignity of being asked, not used. Emily stood beside him wearing new winter boots, a navy dress, and Sarah's small silver cross necklace tucked beneath the collar, not as a religious symbol in the ceremony, but as a private piece of her mother close to her heart. Victoria saw the girl's hand tremble and knelt slightly so they were eye to eye. "Your dad earned this," she said. Emily looked at the rows of workers, the flag, the aircraft, and the toolbox now resting on a clean steel cart at the front of the hangar. "I know," she whispered. Then she added, stronger, "I just wanted everyone else to know too." Jack signed his name slowly. Jack Miller. Not beneath Victoria's name, not hidden in a footnote, but beside the people responsible for keeping American aircraft safe. When he finished, the room applauded, and this time, he let himself feel it. He pulled Emily close, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "Your mom would be proud of you." Emily cried then, not from shame, but from relief, because the world had finally shown her that a good father could be seen. 2 years later, a young apprentice arrived at the Harrington Miller Veterans Aviation Training Center carrying a torn backpack, wearing scuffed shoes, and holding a cheap plastic toolbox with one broken latch. He stopped at the entrance, embarrassed by the clean floors, the aircraft bays, the American flag, and the confident people moving around him. Before he could turn away, Victoria Harrington opened the door herself. She was still elegant, still powerful, still a woman who could command a boardroom with one sentence, but there was warmth in her face now, the kind that comes from being corrected by life and choosing not to resent the lesson. Behind her, Jack was teaching a group of apprentices how to trace an electrical fault without trusting the screen more than their judgment, and Emily, now 11, was helping label donated tools for new students. The old rusted toolbox sat in a glass case near the entrance, not polished, not repaired, not made pretty for donors. Its dents remained. Its faded flag sticker still peeled at the edge. Under it, the plaque read, "7 minutes can fix a jet. 1 act of respect can fix a life." Victoria looked at the nervous apprentice and said, "Come in. Around here, we judge tools by what honest hands can do with them." The boy stepped inside, and the cycle closed exactly where it had once been broken. Jack watched from across the room, then glanced at Victoria with quiet approval. She nodded back, understanding at last that money can buy aircraft, buildings, and influence, but it cannot buy the dignity of a father who refuses to let hardship make him cruel, the faith of a child who still believes goodness matters, or the peace of a person who finally learns to respect the people who keep America flying. Have you ever helped someone at their lowest moment and discovered that your kindness changed their life forever? Drop a little heart in the comments if you believe love, kindness, and quiet strength are worth more than money, status, or any fortune. Subscribe for more emotional stories about second chances, hidden truth, and the moment a humble heart changes everything. Comment, "Love has no price tag," if you believe real kindness can change someone's life when they need it most.